In April 1662, Isobel Gowdie appeared in the parish of Auldearn and stated she wished to confess to witchcraft. She came forward before any public arrest or formal charge. Witnesses recorded that she spoke at length and returned again and again. From the outset, she offered a detailed account rather than a brief admission of wrongdoing or vague suspicion. Her decision created a case on its own. Confession came first, and accusation followed after, as authorities treated her words as evidence that required names, places, and confirmation. Auldearn was a small agricultural parish near Nairn, with farms, lanes, and kirkyards closely bound by kinship and reputation. Private disputes could quickly become public matters. In 1662, kirk discipline shaped community life, and witchcraft was treated as a spiritual crime with legal consequences. Ministers and local officials expected confession to reveal a wider threat. Isobel spoke within that framework. The men receiving her confession believed the devil worked through human servants, so they listened for oath, ritual, accomplices, and harm. In her first confession, Isobel stated she had entered witchcraft years earlier through contact with the devil. She described this as a deliberate choice rather than an accident. She claimed he appeared to her in human form and demanded loyalty. In exchange, she said, he offered protection and power, provided she obeyed his instructions. This established the core legal element, a conscious pact. Authorities required proof of allegiance to the devil, not merely folk remedies or suspicion practiced without intent. Isobel confessed that she renounced her baptism, rejecting her Christian identity. She described spoken words and actions intended to break her former vows and accept a new master. She said this was performed as a structured act, not a fleeting thought. The description echoed known religious forms, which made it legible to ministers trained in doctrine. By framing it as ceremony, she provided the sort of proof authorities expected. A ritual renunciation turned an inner claim into an outward act with legal weight. Isobel claimed meetings occurred at night and at repeated intervals. She named places near the kirk and surrounding land, turning familiar parish ground into alleged sites of assembly. She described travelling to these meeting points, arriving with others, and receiving instruction. The emphasis was on routine and repetition, as if a schedule existed behind ordinary life. Naming locations mattered. It allowed investigators to imagine a geography of witchcraft and encouraged them to question other residents about sightings, tracks, and rumours tied to those places. She stated that witches gathered together under the devil's superstition. These were not described as solitary acts, but as group events with attendance, order, and roles assigned. She said members were instructed in methods of harm and in signs of loyalty. The gathering functioned, in her telling, like a county church with its own discipline and hierarchy. Such structure supported existing fears. Authorities already believed witchcraft operated collectively, so an organised meeting confirmed their expectations and encouraged further inquiry into named companions. As she continued, Isobel named other people as witches. Each name widened suspicion from one confessor to many targets, converting her testimony into a map of potential arrests. In Scottish practice, naming mattered because it created lines of investigation. Officials sought confirmation through additional confessions, neighbour testimony, or further accusations, often obtained under pressure. The act of naming also trapped the community. Once a person was spoken into the record, denial could be treated as deception, and silence could be interpreted as hidden guilt. Isobel confessed that witches caused illness and misfortune. She stated harm was directed at chosen individuals and carried out intentionally, not as a symbolic gesture or accidental consequence. She described operations meant to weaken bodies, disrupt households, and bring death. The claims were presented as practical methods, like a craft, rather than spontaneous outbursts of anger. These admissions turned belief into prosecutable crime. Authorities required confessed malefice, because harm to persons or property justified severe punishment and removed doubt about mere superstition. She described elf arrows as hidden weapons used to cause sudden sickness or death. The phrase drew a local law and offered a mechanism for misfortune that lacked visible cause. Isobel claimed these weapons were prepared and distributed among witches, then aimed at victims by instruction. She spoke as if allocation and planning were part of the practice. The detail served investigators. It explained unexplained illness and fitted a shared cultural language, where fairy belief and demonology could be combined into a single account of harm. Isobel claimed she could transform into a hare. She described travelling and evading detection in animal form, a motif already familiar within Scottish witchcraft accusations and folklore. She said dogs chased her while she was a hare, and she ran through the village seeking refuge near houses. The landscape became a route of escape rather than open countryside. By giving a chase narrative, she supplied memorable detail. Such scenes were repeated in other cases, so listeners accepted the pattern as recognizable evidence rather than invention. She added that injury in animal form could reappear on the human body. This linked supernatural claim to physical consequence, making the story sound testable to skeptical listeners. Such a claim implied that wounds, bruises or marks might betray a witch even after shapeshifting ended. It encouraged authorities to look at bodies for confirming signs. The purpose was clear in context: convert an invisible act into something that could be inspected. Where direct proof was scarce, bodily marks became substitute evidence. Isobel recited rhymes and chants, which she said were used during witchcraft. She presented spoken words as essential, not decorative, implying that speech activated power. She described these formulae as instructions memorized and repeated at gatherings. The specifics of wording made her confession appear practical and rule-bound, rather than purely imaginative. Recording these lines also served authorities. Exact phrases could be treated as incriminating knowledge, suggesting training within a group and supporting the idea of an organised practice. In later confessions, Isobel introduced the fairy court. She described powerful beings within a neighbouring realm, presented as distinct from ordinary people and encountered through witchcraft. These figures were not described as harmless. She spoke as if they had held authority and demanded obedience, widening the supernatural framework beyond simple devil imagery alone. The inclusion mattered because it blended older folklore with church demonology. It showed how regional belief could sit inside legal testimony without being treated as contradiction. Across 4 confessions, the accounts expanded. She returned to earlier claims, but added new scenes, new names, and additional details, increasing the narrative's density each time. Officials tended to treat expanding detail as fuller truth. They asked for clarification, repetition, and confirmation, which encouraged longer statements and discouraged restraint or uncertainty. The process therefore shaped content. Each session raised expectations, and Isobel's confessions grew to meet them. Supplying the structured story investigators believed witchcraft must possess. Witnesses recorded that Isobel spoke confidently and with continuity. She did not limit herself to admissions but narrated sequences, suggesting planning, meetings and deliberate action over time. In a courtroom culture that prized confession, such coherence carried weight. A detailed narrative could be judged more credible than silence, hesitation, or fragmented memory under examination. The result was dangerous. Her fluency strengthened the case against herself and others, because listeners equated vivid description with factual certainty rather than possibility or pressured performance. Surviving records do not clearly show physical torture used on Isobel during questioning. Authorization for torture existed, but documentation could be incomplete or absent in some cases. Even without instruments, pressure was real. Isolation, repeated interrogation, and spiritual fear could exhaust a person and produce confession shaped by expectation and a desire for release. The sessions were still coercive by nature. Once authorities assumed witchcraft, questions demanded confirmation, and the safest path could seem to be supplying detail rather than resisting. Those named by Isobel faced danger. Her testimony provided leads for arrest and interrogation, and it encouraged officials to seek matching confessions that would confirm a wider network. In such cases, each confession fed the next. One accused person might name another, spreading suspicion through families and neighbours until the parish felt surrounded by hidden enemies. This widened fallout changed daily life. Ordinary misfortunes guided new meaning, and people watched each other for signs, knowing that a name spoken aloud could become a sentence. The documentary trail becomes thin regarding Isobel's final outcome. Unlike some cases, no definitive surviving record confirms her execution, imprisonment, or formal discharge from the proceedings. Historians often judge execution lightly, because Scottish witch trials in this period frequently ended that way, especially where confession and naming of others had been firmly recorded. The absence of a clear ending affects memory. Her words remain strongly preserved while her fate does not, leaving later generations with testimony but without the final official consequence. Isobel's confessions endure because of their length and apparent verbatim preservation. They provide an unusually sustained account from the accused, rather than a brief clerk's summary. The material captures how witchcraft was described as practice, pacts, meetings, ritual speech, harm, and supernatural travel. It shows what authorities expected to hear and record. For historians, the value is comparative. Few Scottish cases offer such a dense narrative voice, allowing reconstruction of themes that appear elsewhere only as short, repeated fragments. The case shows how belief operated as evidence. Physical proof was rarely available, so confession, narrative detail, and theological coherence were treated as confirmation of a hidden reality. Once the framework was accepted, each detail reinforced the next. Pacts justified meetings, meetings justified naming, naming justified arrests, and arrests created more confessions to reinforce belief. This produced a closed system. Contradiction could be treated as deception, and lack of proof could be treated as the devil's concealment, leaving little room for ordinary explanation. Investigators listened for specific elements: renunciation of baptism, allegiance to the devil, participation with others and acts of harm. These were the recognised components of witchcraft crime. Isobel supplied these components repeatedly. Whether from conviction or pressure, her confessions matched the structure authorities sought, which increased their confidence and produced scepticism. The system rewarded agreement with its categories. A coherent confession was taken as truth, while uncertainty was treated as resistance, encouraging accused people to speak in expected patterns. In Scottish witch trials, confession did not guarantee mercy. Admitting witchcraft validated the threat and justified punishment, even if the confession included repentance or requests for forgiveness. Confession also endangered others by naming them. A person might speak to reduce immediate pressure, yet those names become new cases, producing further interrogations and further harm. The danger was structural. Once confession entered record, it became permanent. The accused lost control of the story, and authorities used it to pursue wider certainty and closure. The Isobel Gowdie confessions show how a community can convert fear into procedure. When institutions demand a cause, narrative can become proof, even without independent verification. The process offers order. It turns misfortune into explanation, and explanation into judgment, allowing officials and neighbours to feel that chaos has been contained and punished properly. Yet the cost is visible in the record. People become evidence, speech becomes a weapon, and belief becomes law, leaving future readers to confront how certainty was manufactured. What survives is not proof that witchcraft occurred, but proof that witchcraft was believed and enforced. The confession shows how authority shaped reality for ordinary people. Isobel's voice remains in detailed record while her life fades from it. The imbalance is striking. Testimony preserved carefully, outcome preserved poorly, leaving questions that cannot be closed. The case therefore endures as a document of power. It records what a system demanded, what a woman supplied, and how a parish learned to treat words as lethal facts. In 1662, Auldearn received a confession and treated it as a map of hidden danger. The words created a framework that could absorb names, places, and misfortune. The record shows how a label can provide certainty without understanding. Once witch was accepted, every detail was fitted into the same explanation and carried forward as proof. Isobel Gowdie's confessions remain because they were written down carefully. They still show how easily belief can become evidence, and how evidence can become irreversible punishment.